Hello and welcome to today's event. My name is Gabriel Karandishowski and I'm the Chief Operations Officer here at Nimdzi Insights and today's host. Today we'll be discussing findings from the recently launched Lessons in Localization Omnibus report. Now, in case you are wondering what is hidden behind this longish name, we have you covered. This report is the fruit of some 2.5 years of us at Nimdzi interviewing decision makers and leaders on the enterprise side around their localization program setup, their successes and lessons learned, and the strategies and tactics they use to enable the products and services of their companies for hundreds of millions of users across the globe. We've done upwards of 70 interviews to date, and just thought it would be a good idea to distill our findings into one go-to report that is structured in 4 chapters with a selection of 20 lessons shared by fellow localization managers. If you haven't yet noticed the signs of excitement in my voice, and that's very much true, it's not the least because we have 4 wonderful panelists joining us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much and welcome. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us. I know some of you have been in the interviewing seat before for these lessons. Now, before we get down to the nitty-gritty, a round of introductions. So I'd like you to please introduce yourselves in a few words. What is your current role, where you work, and what gets you excited about localization? Vinny, let's start off with you.
Hi, Gabriel. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Vinny Brito. I'm the head of localization for Invent. Been at the company for about 18 months, so building up the function still. And what really gets me excited is how localization is cross-functional. And, in this digital age, especially with the pandemic, all content and all experiences now are more digital than ever. And I like to say that, content is the currency of digital. We make this content global. So we make this currency of digital be a global currency. We bring experiences to everyone on the planet, and we enable this to be, a global experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving on, Julia. Over to you.
Hi, I'm Julia Greco. I currently lead localization at Shopify, the commerce platform. I've been at Shopify for 6.5 years, and what I find exciting about localization and the languages industry is how innovative it is and how it constantly changes, and it forces us to stay up to date and on our toes. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Thank you. Paul, over to you.
Thank you. So Paul Gretton from Philips. I'm part of a team that enables an end-to-end flow of content. So the creation of content by the businesses, then the validation by legal and regulatory, it's translation, localization. In some cases, it's activation even. And we're now also looking at its performance. So within that sits translation, localization. And it's not something that burns in our company, so it's not an urgent thing, but it also doesn't shine. And that's the part that really gets me going. How can we make translation and localization really shine for the company?
All right. That's a great mission statement right there. Thank you. Last but not least, Tamara.
Thank you, Gabriel, and hello, everyone. My name is Tamara Tirjak. I am the head of localization at Frontier Developments, a video game developer and publisher based in Cambridge, UK. I've been building up the localization department there for the last 7 years or so. And what I'm excited about is how incredibly diverse our industry is. And just like how we add a unique flavor to how we speak a language, we also add unique approaches to localization problems and how we solve them. And a good solution can come in many shapes and forms. And that's why I'm so excited to be part of this panel tonight.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Once again, great having you. Thank you. Now, let's talk about what we got on the agenda. So we wanted to articulate today's live stream around some of the key findings from our report, and then open the floor to our panelists to discuss and share their perspectives. After all, they've been there and done that, having experienced some of the very situations we'll touch on and found success for themselves and their teams. We will be reviewing the 4 key overarching trends or takeaways rather from the report, share with you some stats, and discuss with our panelists, peeking behind the curtains and shedding some light on some of the questions you now see on your screen. What have you learned in your experience, and what has worked and what hasn't? The deck we're using today will also be posted on Nimdzi's LinkedIn page for those of you who will want to revisit this at any point. Without further ado, let's dive straight into it. So the first takeaway in our report is there's no right or wrong way to run a localization program. The surprising and also fascinating observation attached to it is that each company makes it work. Somehow it all works for each and every company. I have a first statistic that we'll dig into, and that's about where localization is usually slotted based on the data we collected throughout these interviews in the organization. And what stands out is that product seems to be the natural habitat for localization, but it's certainly not the only one. Let's discuss. You all come from different companies in different industries, and it's fair to assume your teams can be slotted somewhere on this chart. This prompts the first couple of questions I have here for you today, my fellow panelists. The first of them being, are you surprised by this?
Nope.
No, definitely not.
Right. With you, Nyson, here, what do you think works best for the localization and translation? Where do you think your work has the most impact at your organizations?
I can take this, or I can start. I don't think there is one size fits all type of answer. I don't think that necessarily there's one department where localization should always be. It really depends. I've heard other people who are definitely more experienced than me arguing that product is the right place for localization always. But to me, I think that what matters more is the chain of command that you have and the leadership that's behind you, because that's really the key element that can make or break the decisions that you are free to make, and if they give you support or they don't, and that can come from any department. So I've been in the marketing department, I've been in the product department, I've had support, I haven't had support. So it really, to me, it's not so much a matter of like where in the org you are, is who is your leadership, your leadership chain. How much do they support you? How much freedom do they give you to make the decisions that are best for your business and the localization? How much interference you get from, well-meaning leadership that doesn't necessarily understand the space or has different priorities in mind and what you think should be the priorities. These are factors that are super important, and they change with the people, regardless of the department where you're in.
Tamara, please.
I absolutely agree with Julia. Since localization works with practically all of those departments that are listed on your chart, I think we can find a natural home in many of them. It depends on the challenges and the priorities you have for your localization program. Each of them have its advantages. So, for example, if you're part of the product team, that's a great place to be if an important thing for you is to have solid processes, automation being integrated with the user experience. In marketing, you're probably more focused towards market awareness and how your message gets targeted to your markets. I found value in many of these teams because I've actually been moving around quite a bit since I started my program. I also found a lot of value being part of operations, where I could build really strong alliances with the IT team, with legal, procurement, which are amazing things to have for a successful program.
Yeah, maybe I think it's also, maybe it's not so much where, but the what. And if you look at it, there's a lot of content created. There can be product content, there can be user interfaces, there can be packaging, there can be technical document, there can be intranet document. All of that needs to be translated or localized to a certain degree. So I think it's more a combination. Where does it logically make sense for your particular organization that the combination of technology, language service providers, management, localization agencies sit together? Where would it make the most sense for your organization to try and have that managed in some centralized form to ensure consistency across those different touch points? Because I think it's very important to have consistency in your localized content across all the different touch points, whether that's website, packaging, manual, user, it doesn't matter. They need to be consistent. So I think that's an angle that is also worth looking at.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to what everyone has said already, I would say don't be afraid also if you're in one place, it's, as Julia mentioned, as Tamara mentioned, and even Paul, it's not going to be permanent, over many years, most likely. I've also, in previous roles, started in IT, then moved to marketing, then moved to content. And each time it was, as Paul just mentioned, it just made sense for that move because that's where the need was at the time. And, so if you are in a place and you think, well, it makes more sense for my organization to be somewhere else, well, don't be afraid to change or pitch that, because most likely if your leadership sees that it makes sense, that will happen.
Very good. So don't be afraid to evolve with the needs of the organization, and the needs of the organization will be different at different points in time and depending on the context and its growth trajectory. All right. In a way, language professionals are destined to evolve as chameleons and adapt to the situation at hand. The element of no one size fits all has been a recurrent theme in these interviews, and we have another graph here that showcases a similar story when it comes to the actual mechanics of the supply chain setup and who does the work. The classic thing, and as is evidenced in the graph, is working with external service providers, but there's varying levels of success working with freelance teams or internal teams. What comes out of it is that the way companies structure their operations is everything is fairly set in stone. There are very few surprises by now in 2023. So the question here that I have for you is, irrespective of the setup, whether working with freelancers or internal teams or service providers, and also enlarging this just for beyond the pure supply chain setup, what ingredients do you think are key to a well-oiled localization program? And Tamara, what do you think? What comes to mind?
Quite a few things. I don't imagine any of these will come as a surprise, and I hope they won't sound like commonplace. But I would definitely start with treating them whether you work with freelancers or with a big LSP or small LSP or internal people, treat them as your team, an external team, partner with them, and rely on their expertise, because the problems that you come across, chances are that they have seen them elsewhere, so they might have a better solution than you would be able to come up with. And now this is going to be commonplace, but communication is key. Because quality at the source starts with you, with the information that you provide to your vendors. And the last thought would be to celebrate your successes and give credit where credit is due. Because when we talk about language quality, we are quite keen to feedback if we come across any issues. But I think it's just as important to give credit if something turned out amazing.
I can follow up on that. Managing expectations is quite a big topic for me, and has been, I think, at the forefront of what I've done over the years, especially within country reviewers. Many reviewers in my jobs, they expected full transcreation or copywriting of content, and that's not always possible. Whether it's marketing content, whether it's technical content, you have to manage those expectations so they know what is it that they're getting and what is it that they're not getting. And that, to me, as well as communication, as Tamara said, those two would be the two things that, to me, really make a difference in the localization programs that I've run.
I want to add something if there's time. I think that to be successful, on top of everything that Tamara and Vinny said, and I absolutely agree, you also have to be constantly challenging yourself and wondering if your existing processes, systems, tools are still fulfilling your current needs, because things change fast. Maybe I come from a company where our pace and is particularly reckless in a way, like super fast. Like I work at Shopify, it's a tech company, things change constantly. But I find that, you can never just sit back and be like, okay, I got the right LSP, I got the right tech stack, I got the right processes and systems, and now I can just sit back and relax for the next 2-3 years. No, like things are gonna change, something's gonna break, something was working no longer works because the business needs are evolving. The teams that are your stakeholders are evolving, their needs are evolving, and so you need to be constantly paying attention to that and fine-tuning, or sometimes just stopping something and restarting it completely differently. You may want to consider different vendors, even if the current vendor that you have is marching along okay. You may want to look what else is out there, just because who knows, maybe you're missing out on something. So I think that just never be satisfied with the status quo is a key to be successful, to be a very strong localization team.
Very good. Paul, how does this resonate with you?
Yeah, I just, in addition to what you've all said, I think there's the element also, this technology within this domain is changing very fast. And I agree with also what Julia is saying, keeping an close eye on what makes sense for a particular content type. Challenge that on a regular basis, indeed. Challenge the established process, but also the established technology behind it. If you see the evolution of machine translation, post-editing works, the speed on which things can be done, the level of quality is way different from what it used to be, right? And this will only evolve over time. With ChatGPT coming, this can only become even more accurate or better. So I think we need to keep a very close pulse on that kind of technologies and see where it can really be used to the benefit of your company. So, quick example, when we talk about our intranet, I don't need to get that validated, right? Because it's purely internal usage. When it is used externally, then I want some level of validation. If it is medical, I really want it to have, it needs to be spot on, right? You have one word wrong in medical device, you can cause a problem. So I think you need to look at the different types of content and where it makes sense to apply which kind of service.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate the insights. Now, let's move on to the second takeaway of the report, and that is companies shape demand via the products and services they create, and end users drive demand for localization. Now, we don't necessarily have a fancy graph to show for this particular takeaway, as feedback from different interviewees is so different and it's quite impossible to capture in just one graphic. However, a recurring theme in our interviews, and by now it should come as a little surprise to most of the audience and yourselves, is that localized products do impact customer experience. And you just mentioned that, Paul, the slightest error has a massive impact on the customer experience. Inversely, also, the absence of a language choice can have a negative impact on customer experience. So we've been talking to companies that are actively looking at how they can continue to expand the user experience part of their game. Adding new languages is just one way of doing so. Hyperlocalization or designing global-ready products are a couple of other keywords that are referenced. So my question to you is, I'm keen on hearing your perspective, is how does the typical conversation go with your stakeholders when you're trying to demonstrate just how a decision that relates to a particular language or a particular region can have a positive and a negative impact on the brand and users in an entire region of the globe? Vinny.
Yeah, well, if you're not in a region, to simplify, if you're not in a region or if you're not in a language within a country that speaks that language, you're not going to sell as well as if you were. So there's always the financial aspect of, we're spending maybe 10, 20, 30, 50, 100,000 to translate it and go into a new market, and our sales will go into the millions. Localization actually has that big of an impact. But more than that, it's your brand image, it's really customer experience, and it's the value that you bring to the organization when you translate and when you go into a different market. I always try to go into the value proposition, which is, if we want to go into, you mentioned here Arabic, for example, what is the value that we're going to bring to that region? How is our brand going to be shown in that area of the world, and how much more are we ultimately going to bring to the bottom line?
Tamara, what are some of the arguments and keywords you've used and had success with when in conversations with your stakeholders internally?
That's a good one, and of course I agree with Vinny that these are really important conversations for localization to drive, because expanding to a new market definitely means new opportunities. But I also feel that as localization department, we can also provide expertise in the feasibility as well as some technical aspects of going into that market. So going with the Arabic example, yes, we can be aware of the market opportunity and the potential ROI, but on the other side of the scale, we also understand how much effort the UI team will need to put in order to support a right-to-left language. And that's just one example. We can talk about punctuation in different languages, the white spaces or the lack thereof. We can talk about regulatory restrictions such as age rating in case of entertainment product, other barriers such as payment systems if you're working with an e-commerce app. So there are loads of other implications where localization can provide expertise in addition to the opportunity and the ROI.
I think that when it comes, well said, first of all, and I think that the question is what arguments and keywords can you use to gain to be successful in what you want to do as a localization leader. I think it really depends on it changes depending on what company you work for, but you have to align yourself to what your company cares for and how it talks about its mission, basically, because otherwise it's just you're talking to the wind. And another thing that I found is that there are certain keywords that people in localization care a lot about, like the word quality, that don't necessarily always resonate in other circles. And so I read somewhere, and I don't remember where because I hate not to give credit. It's possible that it was Miguel Sepulveda, but maybe not. I'm not sure. And instead of saying talk to your stakeholders about quality, you should talk about UX experience. And I started doing that, and it's amazing. It's actually, or maybe it was Natalie Kelly. Anyway, switch the word quality to UX experience, and like, and you know, it resonates so much more, especially in some groups of stakeholders. So that's something that immediately comes to my mind when I hear that question, like, what keywords or what strategy do you use to, you know, gather consensus? It's just a little anecdote, but I think it's fascinating.
We've used or at least I've tried to use something that is, it always works, right? Money. So if you can hook it onto anything related to money, it will get people's attention. So because in essence, the process of localization for different content types works pretty much the same. So if you can find a content type that really has impact on money, and what we did there is we localize all the campaigns of Philips, okay? On all the markets, all the campaigns, that goes through the same localization process. So we asked our key stakeholders, do you want to measure ROC? ROCC. It's an acronym for Return on Content Capital. So if you said, if you really want to understand if your content is resonating, then we need to ensure that we have a very good localization process. And by ensuring the good localization process, we can actually measure per market what content got utilized and what not. And by knowing that, you can identify what was the waste. And if you do that over time, then you get some nice data to show where the company should focus on. Now, it's a short explanation, as it took us quite a long time to do it. We're still working on it, but definitely try and find that anchorage point that you can hook on localization onto, that excites people, that makes it shine or whatever.
Very well. All right, thank you. Moving on then, takeaway number 3 from the Omnibus report, and something we've touched on already, is communication is the glue that keeps the wheel spinning. Let's revisit. There are two sides to it. One is spending time to streamline and optimize communications with your partners, external partners, with a focus oftentimes on transparency and relationship building, and them really positioning themselves as partners rather than just service providers. Then there's the other side of it, identifying who to talk to internally, and then spending quality time talking to your stakeholders to align business objectives and gain support. We have a graphic here out of the report which illustrates the first point. Other than the usual suspects of on-time delivery and quality management, smooth communication and the ability of vendors to act as business partners are the key components here, and you've referenced that already. So a couple of questions I have here for you. When you need to talk to both, you need to have that setup going with external partners and spending time with the internal stakeholders. When bandwidth is limited and you have only so many things to do or so much time in your day, how do you go about this? What are some of the tactics that are successful? Julia, please.
So maybe I'm lucky. My localization team is pretty big. I have a vendor manager, so she takes on all the communication with the external partners, so LSPs and various vendors of various nature. It wasn't always like this, but this is exactly why I hired her, because I needed the help, because otherwise it's too much work for one person. And then in terms of internal stakeholders, it's a bit of a divide and conquer approach. So I'll talk to some. I have a global enablement manager on my team, Alex. She's phenomenal, and that's her job is actually to go around to various teams. We're a big company, but try to catch the work before it starts, so that we can be at the table before projects are kicked off and not downstream when they've already been, they've already been in flight for a long time, and we're just called at the end, oh, right, we need translations and localization, which is never a good thing. But it's a shared responsibility on the team. Like anyone who is willing and capable to lend a hand to talk to internal stakeholders should be doing it, is allowed to do it, is absolutely empowered to do that. Because as you said, there's only so many hours in a day and one person can do it all. But I did set up the team, like the hiring of the vendor manager was critical for me for this reason and a few other reasons, obviously. But yeah, this was a big deal, definitely.
Winnie, how does this resonate? How do you prioritize and split your time among all of those different things that you need to be doing?
Yeah, I can kind of give the flip side, Julia, because I'm a one-person team. So I kind of have to do everything myself. Actually, I do have one German language lead who works with me, but as far as communicating out, preparing everything, that's just me. So for me, what is working today is having what I call a product owner or a localization report out session every 2 weeks, where I get in front of the stakeholders and really have that face-to-face meeting and that reporting out, saying this is what we're doing, this is what our plans are for the next next quarter, next 6 months, next year, and they can come and ask questions, and we have that interaction every 2 weeks, and we keep it alive that way. But over communication, you can never over communicate. As you said, Julia, you have to keep your stakeholders aligned, you have to keep your vendor aligned. And I would also say, when you are communicating internally, something that you mentioned before is you have to speak the language of your company, right? We as localization managers, many times we get so involved in our own lingo and talking about things that are important to us in our team, but in reality, that may not be so important to the company and other stakeholders. Right, as you mentioned, language quality, or the price per word, and how much translation memory savings we're getting. That's important to us. But if I'm talking to my director or my vice president or to the product manager, they may not care about that. They're important. They're worried about other things. So we also need to learn what is important for the business and communicate that to them. And many times what we need to manage as localization managers is important to our team, but we need to be able to separate those two things.
Well, Tamara, what do you think?
Absolutely agree. So as Julia said, it's quite important to develop I call this the localization spider, because you kind of weave this web throughout your organization, and you know what's going on in the different parts, and you can act on it. And what Vinny said about, speaking the language of the other departments, that's absolutely crucial. And you need to learn to listen to everybody actively. So I come from an LSP background before I joined Frontier. So I did develop this customer-focused attitude. So I kind of went around asking people, what do you do and how can I help? So indeed, understanding what matters to people. If it's the SEO keywords, then address that with your language skills, etc. And another important part of communication I find, and to increase the value that localization gives, is following up, which sounds like a no-brainer, but if you make a promise, then make sure you follow up on that. So it's not just following up as in, hey, you promised to give me this or that, and where is it? But the other way around. So keep your promises. As one of the producers in my company said, there is following up and there is localization. So this is a skill to develop and excel at.
Thank you. Paul, what does alignment mean at such a massive company as Philips?
I think this is probably the most complex part for us to do in such a big company. Again, because we're the sum of so many different businesses, we're the sum of so many different markets, and you're standing in the middle. And you can tell them, look, businesses, whatever you create won't get published or won't get activated unless it's translated or localized properly. And that's where I think it's also the difficulty, because and I've stopped trying to do making people understand what it really takes to do a good localization, because it's too complex for them to understand. And it's, there are sufficient, if you just tell them there are people who have a university degree in localization, that just should tell you what it takes to do a good localization. But then I tell them about the technology. Then I tell them about the machine translation. Then I tell them about translation memories. Then I tell them about adaptation and of content. They get so confused. It's too big for them to understand. So I really think that the essence there is stick, and I think that's where your survey also properly underlines. If you can ensure it creates the right value end to end, so on-time delivery, on quality, on cost, you'll get them. You get most of the people along with you, because the rest is too complex for them to understand. That's why I'm a true believer, and we're not there yet, but I am a true believer that if you really want to have a good translation localization, you need a center of excellence who can do that on behalf of the company.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your perspective. For the last segment of our panel here, let's attempt to gaze into the future a little bit. The fourth takeaway of our report is that now in 2023 is the time to be daring. It's quite vague as a takeaway, to be sure, but especially as being daring and tackling big challenges can take naturally different forms. For instance, when talk veers towards technology in some of our interviews, the three most frequent keywords mentioned are automation, centralization, and integration. So we're sharing here a stat from the report with you that illustrates these keywords perfectly. If you look at it, the purple portion of the graph, it speaks volumes on its own. 37% of companies still send their files to translation vendors manually. Now, to be sure, there are companies at different points in their trajectory, but still, technology is an evergreen topic that influences operations. And with the ongoing hype surrounding ChatGPT, it was mentioned here, we're right in the middle of it, and the future really unfolding before our eyes. So when I transform this into a question for you, dear panelists, is what is beyond the day-to-day when you think where you will be in the next 3 to 4 or 5 years? What stands out in particular?
For me, I think that what stands out right now, we're going to do more and more human evaluating of AI generated multilingual content, because we've already started and it's exploding, this space, absolutely exploding. There's a huge appetite for this, at least in tech. But luckily, there's also the understanding that you can just, generate multilingual content via AI and just put it out there in the world with no oversight. So we're being called as sort of like, the evaluator, the consultants who are gonna evaluate what's being produced in various languages and be like, yeah, this meets the threshold. No, it doesn't, but maybe, we can help it meet the threshold, etc. So coming up with, the criteria, the requirements, all of that work. And I find that very interesting.
Paul, what do you think are the areas where new competence is to be developed in the future?
I'm very much with what Julia is saying. I mean, what can be more exciting than all this new technology that's coming in there? Content explosion, very efficiently translated or localized, relevant to the person. The question is, can we manage it as humans? Do we have, I mean, if I think about it already, the volume of content that, for example, our in-country reviewers need to review, is already too much. So how will we manage if that comes? That is what keeps me a bit awake. So, I really want to make this work technology-wise, but because we're a regulated company, we can't publish any content without it being validated. Now, there's no way the company's going to hire an army of legal and regulatory people to do that. It's just not going to happen. So you have to find here the right balance between what technology can offer and what the company can actually accomplish. And that's, I think, such an interesting puzzle to work on in the couple of years ahead. And I really think it'll be in a couple of years it will done.
Can you expand via the vendors your capacity? Like, are you able to, scale up or?
Yeah, you can. And that's where the nitty-gritty will come, where we potentially could expand, but we need to decide what do we go via the vendors and what do we need to do in-house.
Right.
So you need to find rules for that, right? Because you want to have this done, because the volume is very high, it needs to be semi-automated. So the workflows need to be semi-automated. Otherwise, you're not going to manage.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting question, Julia, and your answer as well, Paul, because that's exactly what I had to do in one of my previous roles. We automated and we fully outsourced in-country review because of exactly what you mentioned, Paul. We had an explosion of content, right? It was not a linear growth. It was really a multiplication of how much content we were outputting, and our in-country reviewers simply could not keep up. They were really buried under the amount of content, and we had to do something about it, and we ended up outsourcing everything to the vendor. And that was the only way that we could really keep up with the demand, and our content could be well managed. And I think that is the biggest challenge for me or for all of us in the next few years, is the amount of content that we're going to be put out, and how do we manage this?
Yeah,
I fully agree with you, Paul and Julie, on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem for us too. And the only way that I've solved it so far is by asking my main LSP to, have a bigger team dedicated to us. So we no longer have one in-country reviewer per language. We have 2, sometimes 3, depending on the language in which tier it is. I also asked for contingency team, a team, that's based in North America for last-minute emergencies that seem to always arise in Eastern Standard Time, end of day. Like, I've been watching the pattern, and when do last-minute emergency arise in for my team, and I felt like we were unprepared to meet those emergencies with the current setup that we had. So I have different in-country reviewers located in different geo areas, so that I have that continuity, the sort of a follow the sun type of model, so that if in-country reviewer, the primary one, is already asleep, I have the second or I have the third that I can go. Just try to think about like all the things that can go wrong and how do we solve them along the line. And it's funny because it's one of those things that after I thought it and I implemented, I was like, I should have thought about this 2 years ago. But when you have a good idea, you always feel like that. You're like, why didn't we think about this sooner? It's like, it's funny how the brain works, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned, Gabriel, on automation. And at least for me, automation, you need a purpose behind it. Because if you automate just for the sake of automating, you can actually make a good process worse, depending on how it's implemented. So I would add, on top of automation, right, simplification of processes and actually improvement of what you're trying to automate. So those two goals, those two things need to be tied to automation. So when you do implement something, you're actually getting better at what you're doing.
Yeah. Because we're getting like the question that's almost coming up, right? It's like we're going to get more content. We need to localize more. We want to decrease the cost, and we want to increase the quality.
And decrease the bandwidth of our stakeholders.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a good challenge for your team, Gabriel.
We're all here for it, to be sure. So we have a little bit of time left, and I'll improvise a little bit. This wasn't the question that was in the script for this, but Tamara, you mentioned something which resonates with me as well. And there's a lot of so we talked a lot about the dynamic and fast-paced environment, the need to adapt, content explosion. The technology is going to be front and center, still taking care of the UX. Tamara, you mentioned something which is celebrating your team's successes. Share your perspective on that. How do you do that? How do you take care of all that we just mentioned, but still ensure that your work is front and center and top of mind for your stakeholders because it's good work that you're doing?
That's a really good one. Good question, Gabriel. Nicely improvised. And I think that's going to be a really difficult one to solve, because indeed we are having a content explosion, and I definitely see large language models to be a very disruptive technology, hopefully in a positive way. But we definitely need to find a solution on that. And I'm not optimistic about being able to apply our old solutions to this new one. So there is just only so much how we can expand our teams, because even if our demand multiplies tenfold, we will not have 10 times as many linguists coming out from university. So we definitely need to evaluate what we mean by delivering quality and our pricing models and practically everything. And we as localization teams in the enterprises need to be on the forefront. So returning to Gabriel's questions, I definitely see a lot of things to be celebrated, because we are going to come up with amazing solutions to these problems. And yeah, the
challenges, Tamara, challenges.
Did I say the P word?
No, you said, yeah, kind of, but challenges.
Indeed, I definitely meant challenges. Yes, and we need to be proactive about investigating the needs within our organizations for communicating with the multilingual audiences, and we need to be there to support them with that. And an interesting thing I thought I have about AI is that if we look at the previous kind of big-ish disruptive technology, which is MT, that was mainly driven by LSPs and solution providers, and enterprises are kind of late adapters, most of them, because there was a barrier of entry. We did not have the economies of scale that LSPs have for implementing machine translation. However, with AI and large language models, I definitely see enterprises to be on the forefront, because we have the need to communicate and to generate the content and to reevaluate how we do business online. And our solutions providers will need to figure out how to support us with that. So there are definitely exciting times coming with exciting challenges. Thank you, Paul. And definitely a lot of things to celebrate.
Very well, thank you. We have just about a few moments left here as our panel is winding down. Shout out to Tucker, who's been manning the deck behind the curtains and following conversations on LinkedIn. And we may have the time to squeeze in one or two questions from the audience. Tucker, is there anything that our panelists can take a look at?
I think you guys are off the hook today. We had a little technical difficulties with the original event, so no questions coming in for you guys today. So you're off the hook. I think
Right.
Gabriel did a good enough job grilling you guys.
All right, thank you very much then. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, whether you are joining live or watching the recording afterwards. Please also join me in thanking our panelists who made time to share their experience with us. Make sure to go follow them on LinkedIn and stay up to date with what they're doing. Tamara, Julia, Winnie, Paul, thank you so much. I know you got busy schedules. You got a lot on your plates. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you also.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. And as we're finishing up, if you haven't already done so, make sure to go to the Nimdzi LinkedIn page, check events and make sure you are registered for all the upcoming events in this ongoing series. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics, please reach out to info@nimdzi.com and let us know. Lastly, if you'd like more information on how Nimdzi's clients leverage the data behind the lessons in Localization Omnibus, I encourage you to check out the resources available on nimdzi.com/testimonials and look at some of our case studies there. You can use these resources to discover how other localization buyers have successfully approached evolving their business and get inspired how you can do the same. Once again, my name is Gabriel Karnadyshowski, and it has been my pleasure to be your host today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.